Doctors of Reddit, what are some of your worst experiences with anti-vaxxers? My stepmom is a pediatrician at a major hospital here in Italy. She told me the worst thing she saw was her anti-vaxxer mom wailing and screaming after her 12-year-old son died of meningitis. The mother didn't let the son get the meningitis vaccine. Stepmom told me as soon as she walked in the room after getting called for an emergency, all the son's limbs had gone necrotic and he was bleeding from practically every hole in his body, including his eyes, since his blood couldn't congeal anymore and was like oil leaking all over. She told me she felt so pissed at the mom when she received the information that the mom hadn't vaccinated her son at all and this was all preventable. This experience isn't necessarily the worst but mainly just sad. I had a 1-year-old infant in the NICU with hib meningitis, which is a vaccine preventable illness. I didn't actually have the heart, or felt there was any reason in the moment, to explain to the parents that what was happening to their child was fully preventable. Long story short, their child came into the emergency room, quite febrile, and non-responsive. The whole workup was done and he was diagnosed with hib meningitis and sepsis and was admitted to the NICU. Unfortunately, he was already fairly advanced into the course of his illness and went on to develop multiple or full complications. Despite being started on the kitchen sink's worth of antibiotics, he developed multiple brain impairments, large collection of pus and bacteria that fill the skull, requiring multiple drains to be drilled into their skull to relieve pressure, or else the brain would have been compressed. To make things worse, the kid incurred multiple ischemic strokes, dead brain, and also developed hydrocephalus. The brain has its own circulatory system which can get clogged with pus bacteria, causing fluid to build up and exerting pressure on the brain. Against all odds, this tiny baby survived the ordeal. You can have your own ethical debate over whether a child that neurologically compromised should have lived, since they will be so profoundly disabled that they will likely require full-time nursing care, and may only live a few more years before dying of pneumonia, but that was the situation. Not a doctor, but worked in a pediatric ED for many years. Had a young boy come in, don't remember exactly how old, maybe 8 or 9. Comes in obtunded and stiff as a board. We take home to the resuscitation room and do all the full workup stuff, including a spinal tap. It was work to try to position him because he was so stiff. I am assisting with the tap. The fellow was able to get into the intervertebral space and a milky fluid literally shoots out of the needle and onto her chest. She hooked up the manometer to measure the pressure and the fluid climbed all the way to the top and out, even with the extension added to it. I had never seen that before in hundreds of taps. I don't remember pressure, but as you can imagine it was astronomically high. We got the kid as stable as we could and transferred him to the PICU. He ended up living, but lost 3 of his extremities due to sepsis, as well as severe cognitive impairment as a result of the high pressures. Cultures showed H-flu meningitis, which is the most common form of meningitis. He was never vaccinated. The hib vaccine is more than 95% effective in preventing meningitis. It was sobering to watch the parents realize their decision to withhold the vaccine has unimaginably altered the course of their lives and the life of their child. Not a medical doctor, but I am a university professor of biological sciences. I was teaching a course this semester that covers how to appropriately conduct research in a variety of ways, as well as how to perform personal, not publication-worthy, research. I remember hearing one of my students say that they were anti-vax at the beginning of the semester. Didn't really bother me because I realized that they were also part of one of my courses where I just so happened to have a lecture planned to analyze Wakefield's MMR autism paper, find points of major error bias, determine the severity of the errors, how to fix them, and discuss his methodologies and results while being compared to the dozens of studies released after his that utterly destroyed his paper. After that lecture, I never saw the student again. Unfortunately, this taught me that when you deal with this group of people, there isn't really a way of convincing them otherwise. They have been brainwashed, and they like their confirmation caves. 19-year-old comes on a gurney, deep coma, respiratory depression, foam issuing from the lips. Mother frantic. Egg reveals the pattern typical of subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, a sequela of common measles. It's preventable, people. But not curable. They buried him a few weeks later. Not a doctor, but my 8th grade English teacher was anti-vax and pregnant at the time. She would constantly tell us about how bad vaccines were and stuff. So one day the science teacher spent an entire lesson just talking to us about how vaccines are good and don't cause autism. A few years later I was talking to my friend from 8th grade who still talks to our science teacher, and he said that the English teacher's baby had autism and wasn't vaccinated. Yeah, I'd rather my child get sick naturally than be exposed to chemical vaccines, a parent, after I spent 10 minutes describing to her in graphic detail all of the ways preventable diseases could maim and kill her infant. Veterinarian here. Had a client years ago who bred Salukis, and who fed raw, refused most medication cause chemicals bad, and didn't believe in vaccination. One of her dogs was exposed to parvo, and she brought it back to the kennel. She tried to treat it homeopathically herself at first, so by the time we saw it, the dog was already pretty far gone. Then the next day she brought in another sick dog. Then another the next day. Then another the next day. All in all, after 6K in bills 12 beautiful dogs died of a disease she could have prevented for $120. After I sent out invites to my kid's birthday party, I found out one of her friends from dance was unvaccinated. My daughter's best friend is in remission from leukemia and is immunocompromised. An unvaxxed kid could kill her. I uninvited the dance kid and very nicely explained the situation. Her mother loses her shit and tries to get us kicked out of the dance school they attend. The dance school owner is an older lady and had no idea there were idiots these days that didn't vax, so she implemented a new rule that students had to be up to date and the unvaxxed kid had to find a new dance school. I felt bad for the kid, but her mother is a sociopath. Herd immunity saves lives when it comes to kids fighting cancer. Student nurse here. The most heartbreaking case I ever saw was a 2 or 3 year old who was facing all 4 limb amputations because he had meningitis and it entered his bloodstream, all because mom didn't vaccinate him. His limbs were completely necrotic, he couldn't eat, had an NG tube, and stopped speaking. You could tell he felt lonely and scared as hell. He got no visitors that I saw, even though he had 8 siblings, and couldn't play with the other kids on the unit because he didn't know how to play without his hands. Crushed my heart. Edit. To everyone commenting that the meningitis vaccine isn't given until you're 11 plus, routine vaccination helps prevent it as well. The Hib and MMR vaccines both offer some protection from meningitis, as well as not living with 8 other unvaccinated children. I work in an NICU and occasionally float out to the term nursery. Our neonatologists also work as pediatricians in the hospital and see the well newborns on top of the NICU kids. The neonatologist went to see a mom who was refusing the initial vaccines. When the doc told the mom the vaccines were recommended by the AAP and asked for reasons of refusal, the mom laughed and told her to do your research. Do your research. She told this to her doctor, who is both a neonatologist and pediatrician. Double board certified. She also is our medical director, has a PhD in biochemical engineering, and is a mother herself. My eyes nearly rolled out of my head. Here's one. Kid comes in after a fall and gets scraped by some rusty nails. Surprisingly is okay after the fall. We want to give the tetanus vaccine since that's common to do after high risk exposure to make sure she doesn't get it. Learn she's never been vaccinated. Mom refuses. Call CPS but mom is connected to some big shot gov official. Kid goes home without vaccine. 3 weeks later, kid comes back in with tetanus, unable to breathe. Suffers irreversible brain damage. Now she is wheelchair bound and needs to be fed through a tube. Edit. This was not in the US. I'd imagine CPS in the US wouldn't care if you were connected to some high level government official and would have let us vaccinated. I'm a doctor but don't work in the NICU, hubby does. Every time there's a crying mom behind the NICU doors who fell for the vaccines and vitamin K shots are evil shit on social media before giving birth and her newborn gets the intracerebral hemorrhage, bleeding inside the brain, that vitamin K prevents. He says it's just heartbreaking because it's something so horrible that could potentially be avoided with one little sting. Once the parents actually realize what they've done, or rather not done, it's just such a heartbreaking picture to look at. On the one hand you kinda want to think that hey you actually believed that these loons on your baby group or whatever Facebook quackery group that brainwashed you know more than doctors and scientists purely based on bad googling and inability to differentiate between a decent research and just shit they put online and call evidence. On the other hand you have this deep sense of sadness for the family and what they are now going through, especially the baby since none of it is the baby's fault or decided by the baby. Hubby says the image of these crying moms is something you never want to see and can never forget. Subscribe for more stories like this. I am waiting. My friend is Kung Fu Panda. Just saying. I guess it is too late. She is near your doors.